Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Fancher from Ozarks Technical Community College, and you are in the session titled, We've Built an Ark, Now You Can Get on Board. Mike Lueke is a professor of mathematics at St. Louis Community College, where he's been teaching for 11 years. And Brandy Englert is associate professor at St. Louis Community College and has been a member of the faculty there for 8 years. They've both been working with OER for several years now and are committed to evangelizing the benefits of OER to students and colleagues. Take it away, Mike and Brandy.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I'm going to share my screen here and hope that that works properly. Give me just a moment. Is that working? Everybody can see that? Okay.
It's working.
So thank you again, Sarah, for that introduction. I want to, by way of introducing the talk that we're going to give here, I want to give a little bit of background about the title. So Brandy and I proposed this presentation in a moment, I guess you could say, of frustration. We're planning on presenting what we hope are some positive developments at our institution, but we've also run into some challenges. And so we often will commiserate with our colleagues on the Forest Park campus and talk about how, we've done all this work. All you really have to do is trust us and get on board. And so there's a bit of snark maybe in this title, but we hope also that that the work that we've done can be informative for our colleagues and for you. So with that, I want to give a little bit of background on where we were several years ago and how we got to the point where we are now. And forgive us for maybe torturing the metaphor of the ark, but we're going to go with gathering clouds and sort of seeing the writing on the wall with some background. And then leaving the dock, which were our early stages in the last years, maybe pre-pandemic, and then heading out into open waters in fall 2018. We made a pretty strong commitment around then as a campus department, but we still had some things out on the table that we could have gone farther, and we have since then. We hope to give you a little glimpse into the things that we've built, especially if you have questions or concerns. And I also want to talk a little bit about how we made the decision to adopt OER throughout our campus department for all of our math students at the Forest Park campus. And then also talk a little bit about the lessons we've learned along the way. And before I get any farther with the presentation, I would like to get a sense of who's joining us and what kinds of things you're interested in, and in particular, what discipline you teach, maybe what institution you are coming from, and some basic information about your background would be helpful so that maybe we can address some questions going forward. So just a little bit of background about St. Louis Community College and about our campus in particular. So the institution as a whole is a multi-campus institution, and we serve about 15,000 students. Like everyone else in the country and in the state, I believe our enrollment is down. So that's a relative low point, but even at a low point, we're still serving a lot of students from 3 different counties in Southern Illinois. 65% of our students are part-time, and like many of you, I imagine many of our students have full-time jobs and family responsibilities. So our students are not necessarily full-time students where doing school is their only work. 50% of our students receive Pell Grant assistance, which is slightly above the national median. And we have data that suggests that students at our institution who receive financial aid, like Pell Grants, have lower graduation rates than those who do not. And at the Forest Park campus in particular, as the only campus located in St. Louis City, we deal with students who probably at higher rates than the institution as a whole. So we had, as a campus for years, been struggling to ensure that our students had access to course materials. And as mathematics instructors, our students were tending to buy very large, very thick, very heavy textbooks that cost a lot of money. And the efforts that we made to mitigate those problems really were not satisfactory. So, we certainly moved toward online homework platforms and e-textbooks, which a lot of publishers have been working with for many years, decades even. But many of our students never really got full access to the course. And as a result, they ended up withdrawing or tried to get as far as they could in the course without that online access. As many of you know, publishers often provide free temporary access for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but many of our students had trouble converting their free access into permanent access. And many of our students would be in the course for those 2 or 3 weeks, and then they would end up quitting because they couldn't afford to convert their access to permanent access. We also had students who had financial aids. Certainly many of our students were on financial aid, and there was a lot of red tape and bureaucracy to navigate for students in order to make sure that their financial aid would pay for their books or for their online access to the homework platform. In addition to that, it seemed like the windows between new editions kept shrinking. We would get commitments from publishers that would say, no problem, this edition is going to be good for the next 5 years. And then the next edition would come out and they'd say, well, we're thinking probably 2 or 3 years out. And then pretty soon it started to feel like every other year, or even every year in some cases, we were going back to the drawing board to look for more editions or new editions. We also struggled a lot with publisher customer service. And it was frustrating both for faculty and for students. We had stories of students who were on hold with customer service for hours at a time and never got their situation resolved. And that was really frustrating for all of us. And in addition to that, we had a lot of students who simply ignored the resources that we had spent so much time and energy curating and trying to give them access to, and they would just go to YouTube and look up videos that are prolific on YouTube. Many of them are quite good, but they would look for content elsewhere, and they wouldn't even use the content that we had worked so hard to develop or to curate for them. So all these things were important motivators for us to think about taking on alternatives. So in the 2014-2015 academic year, our campus department was making several curriculum decisions related to the materials we were adopting. And one of our colleagues who has since moved on to a different institution, Seth Doherty, he started using OER materials for several online courses that he was teaching. At that time at St. Louis Community College, our online courses were developed strictly by individual faculty. Some might have called that time in our online development kind of the wild, wild west, in the sense that our faculty essentially had free reign to make whatever choices we wanted to make in terms of our online classes. That since has changed, and Brandy's going to talk a little bit about that in a bit, but our colleague started using these materials for several online classes that he was teaching. And he convinced me in the summer of 2015 to do the same. So I started using OER for all of my online courses starting in the summer of 2015, and I never looked back. So that following school year, the two of us worked together to use these materials for several more courses. We developed new materials for courses that hadn't been taught online before. And at the end of that first year, we estimated in a presentation that we gave to the college community that we had saved students in the neighborhood of $100,000 in textbook costs, just in that first year and a half, I think. We felt like that was a massive success and a really important thing to share with our community. And we did. And we were able to convince several of our colleagues at the Forest Park campus. So individual instructors on our campus would adopt similar materials. Primarily, they would sort of copy and adapt the materials that we had created and curated for our online courses. And again, typically those courses, the materials that our colleagues were using were for online courses, because we had made agreements with publishers to work with them for face-to-face courses. So it proceeded like that for several years, and we slowly got more and more faculty on board. And by the spring of 2017 or the fall of 2018, we were making some more new curricular decisions, and we decided as a department, as a campus department, to move all of our credit level course materials to either affordable or open educational resources. So there's some caveat there. Most of our upper level courses were fully free in OER, and we adopted for our quantitative reasoning and intro statistics courses because we were also working with co-requisites at the time and making some major changes to our curriculum related to co-requisites. We adopted some publisher-related materials that were connected to OER. So those materials were much cheaper than the other materials we had been requiring of students prior to that. So I think, with the exception of quantitative reasoning and statistics, all of our courseware was free at the credit level. And for quantitative reasoning and statistics, I think our cost was around $30 for the semester. We did maintain a relationship with a publisher for those two courses, but also for our developmental courses, because we were transitioning again to this new prereq and co-req model. We felt like the adaptive platform that we were working with at the time was going to be really valuable in that structure. So we maintained that relationship with publishers there. And there were some growing pains as we sort of made this transition to a larger adoption of OER. So transitioning to the new platform that we'll give you a glimpse of going forward, and new textbooks presented challenges for everyone, including and maybe especially faculty. Many of us were used to teaching out of a particular textbook from a particular author. We had examples and particular exercises that we liked to use and we couldn't refer to in the same way as we did before. So that was a challenge. We also continue to have a communication sort of challenge with students hearing that our textbooks are free and they're found online, but interpreting that as there is no book for the course. And that actually has bled into, if you will, the language that many faculty use. And so it took some time for our faculty to get to the point where they were not saying, we don't have a book anymore. It's just that it's online. That was a challenge of the nomenclature, I guess, to help students understand and faculty. We got a lot of feedback from students saying, you know, the old platform we used had blah, 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 but I was at least used to that. We heard that from faculty as well. There were lots of problems with the platform, that actually several platforms that we were using at that time. But we sort of, it was a devil we knew versus devil we didn't kind of situation. So our colleagues were used to that old platform, but switching to a new one just presented new challenges. And students were in the same boat in a lot of ways. They had experience with other platforms, and the homework platform that we started using was not fundamentally different, but because it was new, it felt different. And yet we still had lots of positive outcomes. We actually were able to address most of the motivations that hit us several years earlier. So students always had access to the course materials on the first day. It was very easy to get them into the online homework platform. That took about 5 minutes and no cost. And students had access to the textbook and everything we wanted them to be able to see on day one. We didn't have to navigate any financial aid issues. We didn't have to talk to the bookstore. We didn't have to work with publishers about free temporary access codes. All that stuff went away and made the early part of the semester much, much easier. Many of the old features that we relied on from our older platforms or the other platforms that publishers were making available to us, those same things still existed in the new platform and the materials that we were using. We did have to find them in some cases. We had to learn some new ways of using them in other cases, but most of the things that we really wanted to do, we were capable of doing with this new platform and the new books that we were using. And the other thing that it took away a lot of frustration from having worked so hard to pick, to choose, to curate resources for students, and they would then possibly ignore them, either because they had trouble accessing them or because it was just easier to do a YouTube search. Students didn't stop searching YouTube or Googling the terms that we were working with them on, but at the very least, they hadn't wasted money on the materials that we had placed in front of them. So that was a concern that completely went away. And in addition, there was never going to be a complaint that we didn't use the textbook, or if there was such a complaint, there was not really a problem if the instructor had chosen at some point not to use the textbook because the textbook hadn't cost the student anything. And that was not a frequent complaint, but it wasn't an uncommon one either, that students would describe at the end of the semester, this is a great class, but we never opened the textbook and I spent so much money on it. And that was not a complaint that we were getting anymore. So with that, I want to hand it over to Brandy, who's going to talk a little bit about how we changed over from just our credit courses to adopting OER for all of our courses on our campus.
Hi. Yeah, so I think it's important to note, I know Mike's mentioned a phrasing, if you're unfamiliar with St. Louis Community College, when we talk about a lot of things, our whole department or things like that, we're talking about our campus department. And I will get to how this has worked out for what we call district-wide, which would be all the campus math departments later. So we started, as Mike said, in 2018, we went whole hog on our credit-bearing courses. And the hesitance for DevEd at that point in time was that these are our academically most challenged students. A lot of times they're, very unfamiliar with sort of the school process and going to school and what it means to be a student. And so some of the things, the inconsistencies that you might be concerned about in OER of, well, what if the notation in the textbook and the homework don't match up because they were written by different people? Or what if the, language or vocabulary used in homework 1, then they use slightly different verbiage in the homework 3 problems because they were written by different people. And so there was hesitancy that would be confusing for DevEd students who already start out kind of confused. And so we held off, we stayed with the credit bearing, but then what we saw at, a year or so in was that we had alleviated this huge financial burden to all of our credit bearing students, but our DevEd, who represents the majority of our financial aid and the majority of our most financially needy students, were still paying $100 or so for their materials. Also, in terms of students that it's most critical that they have access to those materials day one and that there not be any additional barriers or hurdles to them getting access to their materials and those sorts of things. DevEd is 100% your most needy group or most in need. And when I say DevEd, for those that aren't, and not every discipline has them, we mean below 100 level course. So for us at the time, it was Math 020 pre-algebra, Math 050 quantitative literacy. So last summer, we decided to go away from our publisher materials that we were using for those 020 and 050 classes and go in on OER. And so the big difference here, I think, in our previous adoptions or things is Mike had said we'd kind of been adopting in like a phone a friend. Like I start using it, I think it's cool, and then I get like my office mate, I'm like, hey, you're teaching this class next semester, you want to try this thing that I did that I thought was fun? And we were kind of going person by person, class by class. And so this was a big push to now bring in all of our adjuncts, who a lot of them who'd been teaching primarily these 020 and 050 classes had no experience with my open math at all. And so they were used to the publisher. They were used to having sort of a prepackaged thing to start from. Some of them that were not particularly tech savvy just used what the publisher gave them. They changed the due dates and, rearranged things, but they more or less just took what they were given and taught with that. Some had a little more tech initiative, and they would change out some of the problems or rearrange things or do that. And so we wanted our adjuncts to not feel different, that we were now in this new thing, that they'd lost anything. And so we wanted to have some packages available for those that wanted to kind of just, I want to upload this and I want to teach it. But we also wanted to provide training and support for the folks that were used to having a little bit more control over what they were using, so they could still have that control. And so we did that in a variety of ways. We built, so I last summer transitioned into an assistant chair role. So I ended up putting together, I won't say I built them because I freely stole things from many of my colleagues, but I assembled all of the resources from sort of across the full-timers into sort of templates for the adjuncts to download and start off of if they wanted. In those, there's some instructional videos to help them navigate things. Mike also provides a lot of tech support and kind of as needed, moment to moment. And then during service week, which is the week for us prior to the start of classes, we offered some drop-in help sessions. Hey, you're getting your class ready. Do you have all your due dates set up? Do you know how to get to the grade book? All those things that we think of like Thursday before classes start. But then ongoing, we have a weekly tech colloquium, and the tech colloquium is the fancy name for it. It started during the pandemic as a math department support group. But we've kept it going. It's a great resource. Everybody kind of knows 1 o'clock on Friday. You can drop in if you've got, it's kind of a highs and lows, right? If you did something really cool with technology in any way, we'd love to hear about that. But also, particularly this year, we've tried to make sure that we focused on, hey, are you having any issues with my open math or any of the OER resources that we can provide support for? And our adjuncts have really made great use of that time, and they're a great community in and among themselves. And so if one of them is having an issue and it can't make it to colloquium, they'll pass it through like, hey, John, you're going, tell them I'm having this issue, tell me how to fix it later. And so that's been a great support for them, not feeling, we also don't make them sit on hold for an hour and a half. But for letting them know that we're not throwing them out in the wilds. And in that sense, my first semester as an adjunct, I was teaching on publisher materials. I was handed a book and told, you get to teach elementary algebra. Here's the book. Here's the list of chapters. Go teach, right? So even though we've gone away from publishers, what I've provided our adjuncts this summer and fall is way more supportive in terms of trying to, build a course and design a course than what most of us probably remember being handed our first semester teaching a course. So we've talked a lot about what we've built and maybe convince you that it's kind of cool and worth taking a look at. So I thought we'd take a peek, and I apologize for the eye chart. I know this isn't great instructional design here, but I wanted to fit a lot in a little. I will also say that my colleague and I that design most of this are rather colorful people. And if you're more like my husband and colors scare you a little bit, you don't have to put this many colors in your My Open Math class. I will say that. But My Open Math, which is what we use for our homework platform, who was built by David Lippman, who's up in the Pacific Northwest, can be used as a standalone LMS, essentially. So if you're using it as a standalone LMS, this is sort of what it looks like. It does also integrate with institutional LMSs. I integrate mine with Blackboard, and will soon be integrating with Canvas, but that's a different talk. So this is what the template looks like. It's got content areas in there. I've got one content area expanded. So there's links to videos, links to the textbook. Because they're all virtual textbooks, you can link directly to the section or chapter that you want associated with that lesson, which is nice targeted information. There's an online homework. There's some offline group works or worksheets. This is the Math 020 pre-algebra one. We built the same sort of thing for Math 050. So that was sort of my main job in building this, was trying for our adjuncts and for our students, right, that are going through this DevEd sequence, that it be familiar. You know, if they start in Math 020 and they kind of learn their way around, then when they go to Math 050, it's not going to be like, oh, shoot, now I got to learn where all the buttons are again. I got to figure all this stuff out. We've also got some other courses that I included in here. Math 108 is one of our courses. And this is one that we're in the process of building. So I've built out the traditional one. This is a course that we offer, is a course. It's a course, of course. But we also have, through our CTE programs, a culinary program. And so they have a special section. They have a culinary math textbook that they like us to teach out of for their students. So in our schedule, even though we offer Math 108, there's always one or two sections that are designated specifically for culinary. So we've built one shell there. I've got the traditional shell expanded, but then we'll also have culinary. So for faculty, you just look at it, whichever one you're doing, you turn those on. And I think I showed this one. This one's built more for like a flipped model. So there's mini lessons in this class that have videos and practice exercises. If any of you have used sort of those interactive assignments in some of the in some other publisher materials, there are some pre-built courses, and you have the ability to build for yourself those mini lessons or those sorts of things here as well. The last thing I'll show you in the peek here is the support, as I mentioned. So each one of those templates you'll see had that pink folder that's for instructors only, and it's hidden. And the content varies slightly on it based on what's provided in the course shell. But there's always information about the course. There's those videos that kind of walk everybody through opening the folders, seeing what's all in there, how to change due dates and assignments, how to make a test, and that sort of thing. Those are kind of the basic. If you're not going to dig in too deeply, you're going to need to change the dates. You're going to need to build a test potentially. Any document that's provided for students in sort of the course is given in an editable version for the instructors in that pink area if they want to tweak it and then change out what's there. Similarly, in the green sort of starting area for students is kind of a template. And so the instructors will go in and put their syllabus and change, you know, if they want to change the calculator info or they want to do those sorts of things. There's always an intro assignment to get them familiar with it. But again, as they progress through Math 020, Math 050, they would be going through the same sort of orientation process each semester. So that's really just a peek. And I promise if you are interested in a deeper dive or a better HGT, I don't know what sort of tour you do of an ARC boat, but we'll get it. We'll get the Property Brothers and we'll do a tour. So in terms of the sort of things that are in the boat, most of our textbooks come from OpenStax. That's a place to start. And I even hesitate on the mostly. I refer to OpenStax as like a gateway because it has a really nice online interface for the textbooks. So a lot of the interactivity that you might be used to in publisher ebooks is available through OpenStax. They also, you can buy, as a statistician, I hate to speak in absolutes, but I haven't found one yet, I will say, that you can't buy a hardbound, traditional, good old-fashioned textbook version of on Amazon for 20 to 40 bucks, depending on how big the book is. So it's a safe place to start. It's where I started, I admit to being, you know, a hesitant person at first as well. But once you kind of go down that rabbit hole, then OER Commons has a lot of things. There's a lot of other authors. I'm obviously only really familiar with math, but I've branched out to a lot of places beyond OpenStax. So you have, it's not like if I'm gonna go OER, here's the OER stats book, or here's the OER calc book. You'll have just as many overwhelming choices as you do when you're trying to pick a publisher, stats book, or calc book. As I mentioned, my Open Math can be used as a standalone LMS, and it has a lot of really cool features that that lead a lot of our faculty to basically just put a launch link in their Blackboard page and then run the whole course through my Open Math. But it can also integrate into your institutional LMSs. I know for sure Blackboard and Canvas, and I'm fairly certain it does all the others as well. Beyond just the book and the homework, there's a whole lot more to teaching than just the book and the homework. And so there are a ton of really great resources. So one of the things, and even before virtual learning and any of those, we were all big proponents of the Desmos and Geogebra graphing calculator apps for phones and tablets. Mike could give you an entire talk just on his feelings about TI 83s and 84s, but they're really great. Geogebra, I know works on both Android and Apple devices. And is just one app. Desmos is two separate apps. It's either Desmos or the Desmos Test Mode app. But the nice thing about them, if you're unfamiliar, is they lock, when the student goes into test mode, it locks all the other features on their phone. They can't even silence it if it rings, as I discovered during one test. So all they can use it for is a calculator. And Geogebra has a for function, has a scientific, has a graphing. So if you even want to limit what type of calculator they're allowed to use, you can do that. But they don't need to pay $100 for a calculator, even if they're in Calc 2. The Desmos classroom activities are super fun. There's a million of them. Again, that's a whole other talk on all the awesome things you can do with Desmos classroom activities. But there's a lot of great things there. And Google Apps, Wolfram Alpha, just fun ways to get your students kind of digging into some of the tech. And they're free. They're free to use. So far, as with my rainbow colors, I've kept this very positive and optimistic, and everything is going great. And I didn't even think of it as like the rain. Isn't there a rainbow when the arc, like the rain ends? That was my rainbow. I should have worked that in somehow. But there are still setbacks. Okay, it's still slow going. And as personally a person who's not known for their patience, it's definitely hard when things don't go as quickly as we want. So Mike mentioned at the beginning that a lot of this started in online classes, and in that wild west time where we just got to build what we want and do what we want and teach what we want, and you know, life was free and great. And I think pedagogically any of us can recognize that there's some reasons why the wild west isn't the best model for an educational environment. But so the college has shifted, our particular college has shifted to courses of record, abbreviated COR, because we love our acronyms. And so for online classes, particularly those in our motor library and things like that, that have a high enrollment, they are trying to standardize a little bit. And we are a QM institution, so we do some alignment with that. And unfortunately, around the time that Forest Park was trying to push out of just our campus into other campuses, this idea of OER was also the time that COR, you see how like OER, COR, it's a little too close. And so as all of you are either our faculty or work with faculty know, we are not so great at being told what to do. We are teachers because we like to be the one to tell people what to do. And so there was pushback among my colleagues, and I myself was not thrilled with this course of record idea. that I wouldn't be able to just do what I wanted when I wanted, because I knew what the best thing to do was. And so that's created some tension in the OER. And Forest Park as a campus had been the leader in a lot of our online courses. And so a lot of the sort of initial iterations that were presented to wider faculty is, here's a course of record you could use. It's already built. Happened to be one of the Forest Park courses that was built in OER. And so there was a lot of, I don't want to use so-and-so's course. What makes you think so-and-so is better at designing courses than I am? So there were issues. So there was a lot of setbacks in those years. We're getting past some of that course of record tension now. People are buying into the process more and getting more involved. But then people become a lot more concerned about the materials for those courses. This is what I'm going to have to use. And so as a lead faculty for a course of record, I am aware of what a great opportunity this is for us to utilize OER, because a lot of the things that our colleagues are stressed about, tech support stuff, I'm going to have to go, the exercises are no longer linked to the book. They're just linked by objectives. So now I've got to figure out if this is the graphing lines problem that I want to use that aligns with the way I'm teaching it, or if it's something else, right? So for course of record as a lead faculty, I put together all that for, we had a whole design team and we put that together. And so a lot of the stress of designing and building the course isn't there, but it's also hard for those colleagues to like see it that way, because they're used to, you know, when they think, oh, if we adopt OER for this course, and all of us have to use OER, and I'm going to have to build this course in OER, and I don't know how to do that. And so it's been a lot of trying to communicate right now that like, no, this is a great way for you to get introduced to it, because somebody else, or if you want to be part of the design team with support, then is going to help design it so that we can all agree that this is kind of the way we want to use it. And then someone like me is going to be assigned release time to maintain it and to be a resource for you if there are issues or there are questions or there are things going forward to support you. And so it's been a lot of like trying to change that narrative and trying to help people not see the new and the scary, but see the opportunities for trying something new when there is a net and there is a support there. And I think, while unfortunately I can't tell you, and this is the class that we got through and everyone in the district is using OER for it yet, I think we're very close. I think we're doing some redesigns on our intro stat, which is the class that I am the lead faculty for. And I'm hopeful, if we were to give this talk next year, that I would be able to say, and our intro stat is now district-wide OER across all campuses. So we are hopeful in that. I think one of the main things that I keep trying to point out to colleagues that is challenging with all of this is that the costs that enable us to have resources that are maybe easier to use, we're not paying for, right? It's not me spending the math department budget to buy lecture slides, to buy publisher videos, to buy those sorts of things. It's me asking my students to spend $50 or $100 for me to be able to use those things. And that's kind of how I keep trying to phrase it, to make folks see that, unfortunately, you know, we're making students pay for the way this is set up for resources for us to use. And for those dev ed and for some of those high enrollment, low success classes, the way publishers have changed things, they're not just paying for it once, they're paying for it 2 or 3 times. Okay, that was kind of a downer note to end on, but
well, so yeah, I was gonna suggest a couple of other lessons learned that didn't really make it into the presentation, but I thought I would mention anyway. And also want to give you an opportunity, if you have particular resources that you'd like to take a closer look at, we're happy and ready to show some of the details there. But a couple other lessons or maybe points of interest that I'd like to point out here. So as Brandy was showing you, we use MyOpenMath as our automated homework platform, but we also use it in a lot of ways as an LMS, either as a replacement for, in some ways, our institutional LMS, but generally as an addition to our institutional LMS. When I first started teaching using My Open Math as a platform, there were maybe 2,000 or 3,000 courses that had been built, and in the entire 8 or 10 years that it had existed at that point. So several thousand courses being used across the country using this platform. Felt like a lot in 2015. Now, when you create a course, you get a course number and it's in the hundreds of thousands. So in the last 8 years, it's grown by hundreds of percentages. We're math people, so we like to look at that sort of thing, but it's grown very, very quickly over the last 5 or 10 years. And especially during the pandemic, it grew even faster. So I think that's an important thing to note, that as many of you probably know, being here in the first place, OER is growing quickly. And in some places in the country, it's being required, it's being mandated of faculty. And so we feel like we're getting a little bit ahead of the curve on that. The other thing that I think we have found is that offering free resources to students, Brandy was talking about our free graphing calculator apps that we promote to students, so they don't have to purchase, in addition to a textbook, and online access to something, they don't have to go out and purchase a graphing calculator anymore. It tends to be kind of a slippery slope. You say, well, this thing is free and you can get that thing free and you can get all these other things free. Why isn't everything free? Why is there anything that costs students money? And of course, there are lots of ways to answer that question in other contexts where you get what you pay for. But in this context, there are lots of high quality resources in lots of different disciplines. And once you start saying, we can cut this cost, we can prevent students from having to lay out this amount of cash, it gets really hard to say, well, let's make them pay for X, Y, or Z, because there's a high quality replacement for all of those things that's out there. And finally, I'd want to just mention that our campus department, I think in the time that we have adopted OER over the last several years, as Brandy was mentioning, we've had to sort of become our own tech support. We've had to become our own troubleshooters. We've had to teach each other how to use some of these things, because there isn't a publisher rep who's coming and giving us presentations and bribing us with food. But as a result of that, we have become, I believe, a much more collaborative group of faculty. I think we've had to do that in order to make this work, and it certainly is not perfect. And in some ways, it's more work than it was when we could just grab something off the shelf from the publisher. But I think overall, we have become a much more collaborative group of professionals, and I think that's been all for the better over the last several years. So now might be a good time to just see if there are any questions, or if anybody wants to take a closer look at any one or more of these materials. We're ready to show those things.
I'm really intrigued by the calculator apps. I have never heard of such a thing before. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about how you communicate that to students? And
they're great, and I use them. I have them do it, and in my virtual classes, I always have the calculator, like I have my screen half and half or a third, so that I can be entering it in and they can see how it does. And Geogebra, I think Desmos is catching up, but Geogebra in particular has all of the statistical distributions. What's the word? Distributions in there. So they can do binomial distribution, they can do inverse normal, theta. Everything they would do is just, and the help feature, it's very user friendly. It's very point and click, and it's free. So it's made doing a lot of my statistical things, probability things in classes. I don't have to teach them how to do combinatorics. We don't have to do a lot of time and how to use the choose function and canceling factorials and all that jazz. I can just go, here's the button, and we can focus more on, like, now we have a number, what do we do with it, kind of time, which is the fun time.
Yeah, so I'm just sharing a version of the or the page where you can download these apps. They're available in any mobile app store, whether that's the Apple Store, the Apple App Store, the Android Play Store, whatever, Google Play, and they're totally free. And it comes from another another thing that I often find myself telling my students. You have a computer, you have a calculator in your pocket that you're always carrying around. They won't necessarily carry a TI graphing calculator or Casio or some other calculator around, but they will have this. And if we're interested in giving students an experience of what the technology they might actually use at some point for some calculations or mathematical reasoning, then these tools are going to be ones they're likely to use. So it turns out to be really nice to be able to say, you have this on your phone, you can keep it forever. You don't have to carry around your TI in order to make this work.
It's also really, I'm sure we've all experienced the joys of remote proctoring now in this new world. And there's a lot of things we've gained from the pandemic, but remote proctoring is not my favorite. But these are really nice for that because when I use ProctorU or Respondus, I whitelist I list the URL. And like I said, you can list the URL specifically for the scientific calculator or the for function or the graphing on Geogebra if you don't want to let them have all, if you're teaching Calc 1 and you're like, well, I don't want them to graph, but I want them to be able to, crunch the numbers from a definite integral or something like that. And so you can decide what you want to give them. And like for my students that use ProctorU, when they open the test opens in one tab, the Geogebra calculator opens in the other. And so they have that right there. And then I can say like, if I want it, you don't get a calculator. I don't want to, because we all know like that little black box on their desk, I don't know what kind of calculator they have or what it can do. And so in a way, it gives you a lot more control over what they're doing. And most of our testing centers are familiar now with the app. So even if they come in person, they know how to handle the students with the app. And so it's been, that's been, even pre-pandemic or virtual quite so much, it's been a good resource for us to use.
Have you heard from instructors in any other disciplines? Like are these GeoGebra apps being used in science labs or other places that a calculator might be expected? Or do you know?
I don't know. I haven't followed up with our science colleagues. I probably should and see if they're familiar with them, because I know our chemistry folks and our science folks have done OER lab manuals. And so they're definitely, there's a lot of costs in science that you can't get around because you need certain materials that have to be physically there. So our colleagues there are very conscientious to try to make sure that the costs that can be mitigated are. So it's a good idea.
Are there any other questions from anybody in the audience? I don't see any right now in the Q&A or the chat, but we still have a few minutes if anything comes to mind for people. Mike and Brandy, are you all willing to share your course shells outside of St. Louis Community College?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we have. I have shared my courses with folks in various places, not all over the place, but in several places. And so I think that's a great way to start. That's how I started. I was using other folks' courses, and the other nice thing about there's a community, as many of you know, there's a community of people who are passionate about OER, and they are almost always very willing to share, and it's easy to share because of the licensing. If you're careful with that, it's really easy to share with one another. So, one thing we could do better about is in our own institution, making sure that we're sharing those kinds of things with other disciplines. That can be challenging, but it's an important aspect of reaching out and collaborating.
And I'll throw in when Mike was talking earlier, and I was thinking about, we all have those examples those particular problems that we've used in our notes or in places from a book that we love. We just think, oh, this example just nails it, what I want to get at. And I know there's some librarians in this group and for those in this talk and those that aren't. And I have additional access to a librarian, but I've gotten very familiar with our librarians and looking over fair use. And I print lecture notes for my students, you know, that we kind of go through together. So there's no reason, even if you switch to OER, the graphics and images are a copyright thing. But in terms of a particular problem or an exercise or things that you've done, you can still use all of that. You can still print all of it. It's called a references page. I refer to it as the CYA page in my notebooks that just says, you know, in addition to my original thoughts, you know, like these are other sources that things come from. So I don't want anybody to think that it's like that we are getting on an arc and leaving everything behind. The arc's kind of docked at shore. You can still use some of that stuff, bring it on board with you. It's a luxury cabin. I'm gonna take this analogy way too far. That's sweet, but you know, like there's still ways to use all the things that you really like. I just saw a question pop up. How do you encourage faculty members who are resistant to this challenge, specifically those afraid of the extra time and work? I wish we had a really great answer for that. So Forest Park has been sneaky in that they've gotten 3 of us to transfer from other campuses, and then they've brainwashed us as soon as we were here. But that is the biggest challenge. And I think you nailed 2 of the biggest things that our colleagues hesitate on, is that there's this idea of extra work, because I'm going to have to build the book. It's not built. So, and I think one of the things has been dispelling some of that mythology. Because in my open math that we use, there are a lot of pre-built courses. That's where I start from on a lot of mine. Our Math 020 template, I was like, hey, we're using this book in OpenStax. What have people shared out? Oh, this looks really great. This has all the homeworks already built. This has a whole bunch of things. And then of course I go through, just like you would any publisher built course, I look through it and I go, oh, no, I don't want that question. I don't want that problem. Or I think I want to add something like this. Or I want to move around what order we do the topics. So trying to show folks that there is already a lot built for them, that it's not as much work as they're imagining. And then, you know, mainly just trying to provide support. Our institution, I'm on the Affordable and Open Educational Resources Action Task Force. We put action in our name. So we are trying to currently build an incentive program and the college has sort of said that they want to provide release time or compensation both for the design teams that might build out some of these resources to help with the sort of front end labor, but then also to provide that same resource or release time or compensation for faculty the first time they teach with those materials, to sort of say, hey, you're changing books for no good reason, right? It's not like your book's out of print. It's not like you have to re-prep this class, but you're choosing to for the good of your students. And so we're going to acknowledge that that's an extra lift on your end and give you some time. So I'm hopeful that as that becomes official and solidified, what that incentive or compensation and support looks like, that will hopefully make folks feel like that is being acknowledged, that additional kind of upfront work is being acknowledged and being compensated, and maybe that'll get a few more over that hump.
Yeah, I think the incentive is an important aspect of that. But one other way I would answer that question is to say that there's more work up front when you're developing the materials and customizing what materials are out there to what you want to do. But the good news is that you don't have to redo that work next year or 2 years or 3 years down the line when the publisher makes changes and you have to say, oh, the section that we used to call 3.4 is now section 4.7. And you know, those kinds of changes we don't have to make on a regular basis. We sort of keep the stuff that we want and the stuff that we like, and we make adjustments as necessary. And so it sort of is just shifting the work from being sort of an upfront set of tasks to being ongoing tasks. And I think that's something that we certainly at the Forest Park campus in the math department could do a better job of helping faculty understand. But it's a long journey. So we're conscious of the fact that we're in it for the long haul, not for just a short time. So.
All right, any other last minute questions as we wrap up? Well, Brandy and Mike, I just want to thank you both for your time and for sharing this with all of our attendees. I'll thank our attendees for their time as well. And just remind everyone that the recorded session and a copy of the slides, if made available, will be on the conference website later, probably next week. And the next session of the conference will take place at 1 p.m. So we hope to see folks there. And just thanks again, everybody, for a great session. Take care.
Bye.